Do you like graphs? I love graphs, and I love little widgets and gauges and all kinds of pretty colorful things. So today I'm going to show you how to do a little bit of Grafana work using my data coming in from Home Assistant. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is go to Home Assistant and go to Supervisor so you can get to the add-on store. And in the add-on store, you're going to search for InfluxDB. I already have it installed, so I'll show you a couple of things here first. You want to click on Show in Sidebar, and that's going to show it over here. So you'll see a little icon that shows up there. You can also expand this out and see it that way. And then also you're going to want to find out what port it's on. Typically the default port is 8086. And so we'll just leave it there. This little section of the URL is important too. Since I use Docker containers, the Home Assistant services talk to each other's containers, and they're aware of which container is which using this ID. So we'll use that ID to configure Grafana here in a little bit. Also, you're going to want to install Grafana, which I have as well already installed. And same thing here with Show in Sidebar. Make sure that's turned on and you'll see Grafana show up over here in the sidebar. Everything else in the configuration is the same. Is go into InfluxDB itself, and you need to create a database, and you need to create a database user. And to do that, we go to InfluxDB admin, and we're going to create a database. Now I already have this mostly done, but I'm just going to create one for demonstration purposes. So we'll call this one demo, and click on the check mark. So now we have a demo database. The retention policy is forever. You can change this to delete things at a certain interval, 1 day, 1 month, forever, infinity, whatever you want to do. If you want to keep stuff forever, that's great. At some point, you may run out of space on your device. If you want to purge it after a certain amount of time, you can set the retention policy here. All right, so we've created a database. Now we need to create a user. And again, I have a Grafana user that I use for my Grafana instance already, but I'll create a demo user. So we'll call this demo, and we'll call the password demo. And all the permissions will be for everything, which we'll have to, all right, thank you. We'll have to set here. So we have permissions to everything. All right, so those two things are done because we're going to go into Home Assistant now. We're going to configure Home Assistant to send its data to Influx. So then Influx can be the source that Grafana uses to pull the data. All right, so next up is to open a terminal. You can use whatever editing device you want. I'm doing this directly in configuration.yaml. And so I've already gone into the configuration.yaml file, and I have added a section called InfluxDB. I've added the host name of my Home Assistant instance that is known to my network. I've added the port that you looked at. 8086 is the default for Influx. Again, the database name that you just created, demo or whatever, I use Home Assistant because that was what I already created. And then I use a secrets file for the username and the password. That's the user and password that you just created in Influx for that user. Max retries and default measurement I leave at 9, and the default measurement is state, meaning that when you go in to configure something in Grafana, that it's going to pull up the state. All right, so that's all you need there. Do your config checks and your restart. And then when you're done with that, you should start seeing data come into InfluxDB. Okay, now that you've restarted Home Assistant, you should start having data show up in your InfluxDB. So your next step is to go over to Grafana, and we're going to configure a data source for Grafana. Your Your interface, depending on the version of Grafana and how you have it set up, may look a little bit differently, but the concepts are the same. You need to have a data source before you can do anything else. And so for me, the gear icon is here, and then you click on data sources. I'm not going to add a new data source. I've already configured the data source, so I'll just show you what I have configured. I will say that maybe this should be something a little more descriptive, like Home Assistant or HA or something that you know is your data source for your Home Assistant data. The URL is what we talked about earlier. It's this little ID kind of URL. And then the port number that is defaulted to 8086 and whatever you set up in your configuration. Everything else is the same except for the database name and the user. So whatever this database was that you set up in InfluxDB, use that one. And then Grafana user would be the user I set up. So use whatever user that you set up within there. So once you have data sources set up, then the next step you're going to do is go to add a dashboard. And for that, we click on this little set of squares here and then click on Manage. So we'll just do a new dashboard. And automatically it's going to go to this section that says Add a new panel. So let's do that now. And it's going to take you into a panel, just blank with nothing on it. And then you're going to start adding your information. The first thing you want to do, well, you can go a number of different ways, right? This is kind of the order that I go in. First, I want to make sure on my interface that the visualization that I'm going to be using is the correct one. And it defaults to graph, I think, in most cases. And that's what I'm going to use as a graph. So you can see you can do stats, single stats, gauges, bar gauges, tables, text, heat maps, etc. And there's a whole bunch of plugins you can use that add additional functionality to the type of visualizations you can use. So we'll go with graph, and then we'll go with starting the query here. The first thing you want to do is make sure that you specify your database. In some of my stuff, I have multiple data sources, and so you want to make sure you're using the right data source here. And for me, that's going to be InfluxDB, because that's why we named it, or what I named it. And that's why I say name it something that makes sense to you so you know what it is. So if you have a whole list of data sources in here, you need to make sure you understand which one's which. So InfluxDB is the one I'm using, which is also the default, by the way. So I could have chosen default or InfluxDB. And then we'll go to a measurement, and I'm going to add outside temperature. So I have an integration with my ambient weather station that's in my backyard. And I talk to the ambient API through Home Assistant, and it feeds me data and stores that in Influx. And so I know I can go get that data from Influx and display it here, and that's what I'll show you. So in the US, obviously I'm in Fahrenheit. So what I want to do is look for the default or the Fahrenheit measurement. And that's down here at the bottom. I just happen to know that. So if I click on Fahrenheit, and immediately you're going to see all this junk in here, because we haven't specified an entity to take the measurement from. So this is pretty much everything that has a Fahrenheit measurement in my system. And it's just a bunch of gibberish right now. It doesn't make any sense. So in order to narrow it down, we want to go ahead and specify what we're actually measuring with entity. So I will choose entity ID in this case. And then once you do that, if you have data within your InfluxDB, you should have options to choose from a number of different entities that you have in there. If you don't see any data here or any entities, one of two things. You need to wait a little bit longer for it to populate some of this. So if you have a device that records every 30 minutes or something like that, it may not show in here for the interval. It may not show up until it actually makes an entry into the Influx database. So obviously I've been running this a while, so I have a whole bunch of things in here. So I'm going to choose what I know is the outside temperature for my my weather station, and it'll be not that one, but the temp. New Buck Creek temp. All right. So now I have my temperature displaying, and you'll see down here that it says Fahrenheit mean. So it's the mean value of the Fahrenheit, or of the measurement. That's not very descriptive to me, so I'm going to give it a name, an alias. So I'll say outside, And when I lose focus from that, you'll see it automatically changes to outside. All right. The other thing you'll notice is in this particular case, this particular entity updates quite often during the like every 60 seconds during the day and maybe a little bit less at night. But it does update very often, and it leaves a bunch of holes though. On entities that don't update very often, you would have a dot here and a dot here and a dot here. So the way we fix that is we come over here to our display and we come down to this section where it says null value. And all these little spots here have timestamps, but in the database, there's nothing there. So that's a null value. We want to connect all those null values together to make a nice, pretty line. So let's click on connected for null value. And now you have all of this stuff connected. You can do other stuff. You can play with this. You may not want an area fill. So you can take area fill, or you may want a lot of area fill and make it really thick. Depends on what you're doing with it. I'm going to take it off for now, because in addition to adding the temperature, I want to know what it actually feels like outside. So here where I live, we have temperature and we have humidity, and both of those together, and I say where I live, in the world, anywhere, you have temperature and humidity, or temperature and wind chill, and those two values actually make up what it feels like. So it might be, let's say right now, it might be 100 degrees outside. But if the humidity is high, it's going to feel like a lot hotter. So I want to overlay the feel like, or the real feel temperature on top of this graph to show me what it really feels like in addition to what the actual temperature is. So to do that, I'm just going to add a second query. And I'm going to come down here again and select my measurement, which will be Fahrenheit. And then again, everything with a Fahrenheit thing is showing up here. So we want to narrow that down to the actual entity I'm most interested in. So entity ID, and then I want to choose the feels like temperature. And now you can see that I have both the temperature, which is the bottom line now, and the actual what it feels like. So, and a couple other things we need to do for housekeeping purposes is we don't want to see panel title, because when you go back to the dashboard itself, you're not going to know what this is necessarily. Oh, and by the way, this says fmean, remember? Let's name this feels like. Feels like. And now we have the outside temp. And I don't like outside. Let's just say temp, since we already know what it's going to be. So temp and feels like. And then this panel title, I will change up here under settings. I will call it outside. And now I look at the outside graph and it tells me what the temperature and the feels like graphs are, or feels like values are. And once you do that, you have a couple options. In this particular interface, you can apply it or save it. So this applies, save changes, and saves the dashboard, or this just applies the changes and goes back to the dashboard without actually saving the dashboard. I'm going to save it because I want to go back to the dashboard. And you can call the dashboard something. I'm going to call it demo because that's what we're doing today. And you can put it, if you have multiple folders or whatever, you could call this environment or whatever you want to do. I'm just going to save it under general folder. And now you can see that we've created our first graph using values from Home Assistant to populate it. Some other things you can do here. Number one is I like to see 6 hours is cool and all, but I don't really like to see 6 hours for temperatures. I like to see the last, let's say 24 hours. So I'm going to drop this down and choose last 24 hours. Now you can choose this on the fly for whatever value you want. But when you do a save after you've changed this time value, it's going to ask you if you want to save the current time range as the dashboard default. So I'm going to do that. You can add notes if you want to describe what changes you made. I'm only one messing with this, so I don't need to tell my team or anybody else that I made a bunch of changes. I'm just going to save it because I don't really need to know all that. Oh, and one other thing too is I might want to have this on the full line, so I can drag this around and make it full width of the screen. And this changes dynamically when you resize your browser. And again, save it again. Now notice this time, since I didn't change the time reference, it doesn't ask me to save the time reference as part of the dashboard default. So I've saved it. And now I have 24 hours of temperature data. So that's the what's it called? I've forgotten what it's called. This type of visualization, right? It's the line graph. So now I want to go back and I want to add a, let's say I want to add a gauge. So to do that, I go back into this, or I click on this button here, Add Panel, and I'm going to add a new panel, and it's going to throw it at the top. And it's, again, defaulting to the graph visualization, but I want to add a gauge to my panel instead. And all of the same stuff applies here as far as the query goes. One thing I like to do with gauges when I'm looking at temperatures or doing stuff like that is, first of all, let me define everything for you. So again, same thing, Fahrenheit for this one. Let's do entity ID is going to be, let's do our attic temperature, my attic. Or is that attic, or that must be the garage because it's a lot hotter in the attic right now. So that's the temperature in my garage. And I use that little AOTech multi-sensor 6. And I've done a video on that, shows you how you can install it. I actually did the one for the attic. You can see how I configured that one and installed it. But this is basically my, just the value from the garage sensor. So same thing, you can name it whatever you want. I'll name it temperature, and then the panel title, I'll say garage. All right, so we have the garage, and we have the temperature displayed. Now, I want to know what, from a visual indication, I want to know when I should be interested in things or when things should be an issue. So I want to set thresholds because I want to know whenever I get to a certain threshold, it starts to turn a different color. Just kind of a quick visual indication or reference of what's going on around my house. So in order to do that, you have to come down to field, and this is different in different versions of Grafana. This is something new I had to learn because it wasn't in this particular area before. It was actually down below here in a setting. So depending on your interface, this might be in a different spot, but it functions similar. So right now we have anything from 0 or whatever the lowest value is, they call it base, up to 80 degrees will be green. Well, we're at 95 right now. So that means that we are above the 80 degree base threshold. I want to make 80 actually kind of yellowish or orangish because 80 is not that hot for the garage, especially in the summertime. So I'm going to add another threshold that makes it turn, let's say at 100 degrees, it turns red. So right now, from base to 80 degrees is going to be green. So this number would turn green. And then from 80 degrees to 100 degrees, it'll be yellow, which is where it is now, or orangish. And then from 100 above will be red. So if I looked at this graph or this gauge from a whole bunch of gauges that I have displayed, I would be able to see right away whether it's a value that I'm concerned with. And really, the garage, it doesn't really matter what it does in there unless it gets to be really super hot. You can also do things like, if we go back to panel, you can come over here to display and you can show the threshold labels if you wanted to. So now I know that the threshold, it looks like the minimum is 77, the maximum is 100. That means that the lowest it got to was 77, the highest it got to was 120. So it auto set those minimum and maximum values. I don't like that display on there. It looks kind of cluttered, so I'm just going to turn those off. You can also turn off the markers too, right? You can just have it be this color, and even that's cleaner, right? So I don't need to see where it changes. That might be fun for some of y'all, but I'm going to turn it off. It gives it a cleaner appearance. So I just look at one graph. It's yellow. And that just tells me that I'm in the yellow arc for that particular value I set the threshold for. Now, one thing I'm curious about, which I haven't looked at, is the minimum and maximum. And here we go right here. So I can set, it's set to auto. So I want to set my minimum. I know in the garage, in the summertime it stays pretty warm. But let's just say I'm setting this up for year round, and I want the minimum to be 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and I want the maximum to be 100 and well, it got to 120 yesterday, which is kind of hot for the garage. So let's just say 125. No, 1125, 125. All right. So, and I don't want any decimals, so hopefully it just does that. And so there is now this threshold that goes all the way from here to here. So I'm at 95 over the 125, and it can come all the way down here to 20 as a minimum. You could actually come down here and set another threshold. I don't think you can. Well, yeah, look at this. So this is what I wanted. Oops, that's not what I want to do. You'd actually have to change these. So I could set another threshold to make it blue if it fell below 60 degrees, for example. All kinds of stuff you can mess with. So what we also want to do is I want to say Fahrenheit in here. And so what I'm looking for is, all right, here it is. That's what I was talking about. So now you can, if you want to display as Fahrenheit, you can, again, if you can't see this, I apologize, but I'm going into the drop down for temperature, and I'm choosing the Fahrenheit value. And so now you can see that it automatically puts the Fahrenheit indicator on this graph, or on this gauge. All right, so you can also do other things, like if there's no value, for some reason Home Assistant doesn't give you a value, or in this last 24-hour period, whatever thing you have on the gauge is not giving you a value, something that updates every 48 hours, for example, you can actually set it to do something else, like 0 or NA or whatever you want to do. You could set it to do something there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save this, which saves the dashboard and takes me back to the dashboard. And it asks for notes. Oops, I was wrong. So apply takes me back to the dashboard and saves it. Too big for a gauge for me, so I'll move this over here. And what I'm talking about doing the visualization, this actually is pretty cool because you can then see this. One other thing I want to show you on this graph is let's edit this graph right here. Let's say I want to have a full 7 days worth of temperature data, and I don't want the time window up here to affect that. I can click on query options here, and I can set the relative time to 7 days. So I want a week. So automatically it's going to notate that here, and it's going to give me a week's worth of data. So if I apply now and take that back over here, it's saved my dashboard. I'll just double save it just in case. And I can see what the temperature has been doing over 7 days. And if I change this value to 6 hours, it doesn't mess this up. What it does is it adjusts any other graphs on the page that aren't set to relative time. So that's one way for something that updates infrequently, like once a day, every once in a while. Then you can set that to be a relative time that always stays that way. All right, so if you want these graphs to stay, or you want them to auto refresh for you, you can choose all of these times here. So let's say I want to refresh every 5 minutes. Now my graph will automatically refresh every 5 minutes. Let me save it so it knows that. So when I come into this dashboard, it's going to default to this time, except for the relative time, and it'll refresh every 5 minutes. Okay, so let me just take you through a couple of things, a couple of my dashboards that I use in Home Assistant, and I will give you a kind of quick rundown of what I'm doing with it. This is just a demo, right? So let me go back here, and I can click on that up here, or I can click over here and come back to Home. Either way, it gets me back to my dashboard list. So one of the cool ones I like is the Quick Glance. And you'll see now why I use those colors for the gauges, because I can take a quick look at all of these gauges up here. These are all my temperatures and humidity around the house and outside. Currently 99 feels like 105. And then different other things around the house I use this. I can tell like it's a little bit warmer up here than it should be. But at 105 feels like it's probably normal. When we were going to and from work, I used to have, Well, I still do. This is my travel time by vehicle to and from. And I just used to look at this when I was at the office or at home, seeing how long it was going to take me to get home or to work. I like to keep up with my speed, internet speed. So I run a speed test once, I think it's once every 3 or 4 hours, and just keep that plotted here. And then latency goes along with that. These are interesting here. This might require a whole nother video. You can see I've done relative time on these, so I can't show anything. As a matter of fact, let me just change the relative time on this one so you can see what we have. So my relative time is 1 hour. I'll just remove that entirely. So once you remove it entirely, you can see what happens here. And let me go back to the dashboard. I guess apply takes me back. Again, new interface, getting used to it still. All right, so now you can see that I have had motion on all of these sensors at these periods of time. And the way I do this is I rewrite this value. It comes across as either a 0 or 1 because it's a binary sensor. So if there's motion, the binary sensor goes to 1. If there's no motion, it goes back to 0. Well, I'm marking every time this binary sensor changes to 1. And because Influx is a time-based database, it just kind of puts a tick mark in the database for that value at that specific time, and then I can plot it on here. But we have, if I did 1 for all of these different ones, there would be just one continuous line at the 1 mark, or the 1 value. So the way I'm able to display this is I take and set each one of these to a different value. So for example, I don't know if it's showing, yeah, here we go, so I can see the value here. Let me drag this and zoom in a little bit. It's going to reload this whole dashboard with this time frame. All right, so for example, it's hard to see this, but the front hall sensor gets a 1, the kitchen sensor gets a 2, and then I think there's a 3 and a 0.5 or something, whatever these other values are, right? And all it does is it allows me to plot my motion sensors on a time-based value graph because I'm rewriting the value. Instead of becoming a 1, it comes across. And that might be something, if you're interested in me doing that, post a comment in the video below, or in the comments below. Yeah, post a comment below, thank you. And I will show you how I did that. And the same thing happens with these door events. What is my time frame here? Let me go back to the last 6 hours. Same thing with the doors. I want to know when the doors are open or closed. And again, it's a binary sensor. And what I do with the door, instead of just saying, okay, the door is open or closed, I actually give it a different value. So you have 2 would be closed maybe, 2 would be open, 2.5 would be closed for one door, 3 would be open, and 3.5 would be closed. So not only do I see the time that they were open, but I can tell when they're closed because they're on a little bit different value line here. And so you can see how many times the front entry was open, how many times the garage door was open and closed. And you can see how long it was in that state because it goes from this upper level value, which might be open, to this lower level value, which might be closed. So that's how I do that. I also am able to visually see whenever one of these boxes turns red based on value. I'm able to tell whether a door is open or unlocked. And then of course my uptime is a single stat. All these are single stats, single stat visualizations. Another graph shows my water usage. This is my travel time. I take this travel time, I also graph it visually so I can see when the peaks and valleys are, so I know when the best time is to travel. And I know this video is getting super long, but I just wanted to show you all the little cool things I've done. One quick other thing here, we'll go to environment, and I'll show you one more little thing I've done with this. Similar thing, I've colored these graphs to, at 85, this turns yellow, and at 95, it turns red. So when I'm visually looking at the temperatures for outside, I can tell right away whether they're in the like really hot range. And you can see definitely that we've kind of sit in the hot range since about 10:30 this morning. We've been in like the you know, approaching the sun, and then we got to surface of the sun over here. And then of course I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different things on this graph for inside temperatures, water usage again, and then humidity usage for my different sensors. And this is the cool thing I've done as well is I can tell you how long my air conditioning is running based on the value that is returned to me um, from the system. So if it's a 1, if it's a 0, it's off. If it's a 1, the air conditioning is running. If it's a 2, which we don't have any right now because it's summertime, it would be up here as the heater running. So I can actually look at these things and see when my AC or air conditioner or heater is running and when it's not running. And I did that because I want to see how long during the day it actually runs. So there you go with all this stuff. I just want to show you a few things on how you use Grafana with Home Assistant, and I hope it gives you some ideas. If you have questions, let me know. I've played around with it a little bit. I know a little bit of things, but I'm no expert. I will do my best to answer your questions. If you have any ideas or things you want me to make videos on regarding Home Assistant or Grafana or electronic toys or whatever, just let me know. Leave me some comments. Make sure you subscribe. It's very important. Helps me keep making these videos. It lets me justify to my family why I'm doing this. And then make sure you hit the alert bell so that you know whenever I drop new videos. And then we'll see you on the next one.